And adjusting. We're looking at the public health data as it comes in every week. We do receive new guidance from the Department of Education, from the Department of Health, and the MSHSL quite often. And so that sometimes informs different decisions that we make and shifts that we are required to make. And then initial input and feedback from students and staff and families. And at this time, I'm going to have our 3 principals come up and share just some updates about their buildings.
Good evening, everyone. Well, as you can see, I would say probably all 3 of us are in continual communication, I would say, with all of our stakeholders, and it takes the shape of various forms. A lot of it is through face-to-face conversations, emails, meetings with staff, a lot of informal walkthroughs with students, and just checking in to make sure, like Renee said, with a lot of that, not only the academic piece, but that wellness and that mental health, and just making sure that our kids are feeling good about being back at school. So at the elementary school, for us, we really are using our building leadership team to be able to filter through a lot of our questions as a staff, whether it's modifying our master schedule, taking a look at our health and safety guidelines, the facilities use that we have. That's indoors and outdoors. I know with the weather changing a little bit, we may not have as many classrooms outside, but we've had a lot of students and staff outdoors. And a lot of that is just organizing our spaces outside so that we can maintain that social distancing in the pods that we are all trying to stay within. And then monitoring our enrollment numbers. We're continuing to get students entering into the building, into our school district. Some of them open roll, some of them are moving here. I just had a family call today that they moved from Shakopee, so we'll be placing them here shortly. We now have devices in all of our K-4 students' hands. Ryan, you talked a little bit about Emily's experience, with technology. It's great because our youngest learners, even though they may not have the ability to do all of the login like our upper elementary kids, our technology department was fantastic with developing a QR code where the kids hold up their card in the camera of the Chromebook and it dings and it gets them into where they need to be in Google Classroom, and then they just take it from there. So it's a really great tool for us to have in case we need to utilize that off-site in the future. It's allowing our students and our staff to be able to enhance their learning while they're here on site. Feedback from staff. I meet weekly with the staff on Wednesday mornings. We have an optional Q&A. It's a Google Meets every Wednesday to just talk through things that are happening, whether it's COVID related, just building related. A lot of it's just having those opportunities for staff to provide feedback and ask a lot of questions. Feedback from families and students is critical as well. We were fortunate to have our families come in at back to school conferences, and a lot of what I heard was, we're so glad you're back every day, all day. We continue to hear that from our families, whether it's in conversations still at school. We're limiting, who's coming into the building, so we don't, maybe have as much face-to-face with our families in school, but I know at a lot of our community events or just around town at different local businesses, I hear from quite a few families are thankful that we're able to make this work. And then most importantly, our students. Our students are very excited. They're very resilient. It's, with the exception of the masks, they're kind of just going about their day as they usually would, with laughing and enjoying, each other and that relationship building. The one thing a lot of them have just commented on is, I wish I could see my friends from my other classrooms, whether it's recess or lunch or some of those other unstructured places that they used to be able to do that in a regular school day. Questions at all about the elementary school?
What is the participation that you have from your staff feedback? Do you have a lot coming in?
For that weekly meeting?
Yeah, for your weekly meetings.
You know,
is it the same people? Is it different? Is it?
No, it's pretty much all the staff. I record it too, so that for staff who, for whatever reason, can't attend, I do put it out to our staff if they want to watch it another time. So that includes the comments. A lot of staff put chat questions so that I can answer it in live time. So all of that's recorded. So even if a staff doesn't show up in a live Google Meet session, they can look at viewing it later and come back and circle around with me.
Okay.
Are the, like the open enrollment enrollments and the number shifts and some of the kids coming back from virtual academy.
Mhm.
Is that working out numbers-wise?
Mhm.
Are we okay? We're not looking at having.
No, I think right now we're okay.
Okay.
We're really just making sure that those rooms that have the 2 classrooms typically will get those students first because their capacity looks different than a singleton classroom. But then it also depends on the need of the students. If we have students coming in that have unique needs, if they're special ed, we need to be mindful of what their academic and social emotional needs are. So if we have para support that's needed, things like that. Our staff has been fantastic. No matter, I walked a student down today that it was his first day of school, and the teacher was gone in the morning with the intent of coming back in the afternoon, and the teacher had left a welcome letter for that student coming in saying, hey, I can't wait to see you this afternoon. Here's a buddy in our room that I want you to connect with, and so I was able to do that. So our staff has just been great welcoming all of those new kiddos.
All right.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So the middle school is unique. Maybe it's the middle child syndrome, but just as a reminder, we have 2 different models going on within one building with one staff. So the thing that I would say is that our staff have really dug in and done an amazing job and are knocking it out of the park. I would say that they are their own worst critics, and just meeting with one in particular today about giving themselves grace and giving herself grace as she's moving through. But I would just really recognize our staff that they are working extremely, extremely hard. We have our kids that are on site, we have our virtual academy kids, and then we have our kids that are gone for whatever reason, on top of all the normal duties that they have to be a professional. So they are doing an amazing job. So I just wanted to start out and just publicly recognize and thank our staff. And when I say our staff, obviously I'm talking about our teaching staff, but our paraprofessionals are supervising classrooms. They are knocking it out of the park. Our custodial staff, our food service staff, our secretarial staff, people are just going above and beyond to make sure that kids' needs are being met and continuing to have that student-focused mentality. So I just want to really recognize them. But from one of the constant things that we've been talking about really from the get-go as a staff is how do we get more face-to-face instruction for kids. So we talked a lot about synchronous and asynchronous instruction, but we met today as a staff after school, and I think there's a misconception out there that everything is done via video. Direct instruction is that way. I mean, that's the bulk of the instruction is happening, but the advantage that we have in our 5th and 6th grade is that all of our teachers are licensed to teach all of the different content areas. So where Mr. Steele in 5th grade may deliver the math lesson via a flipped model, Miss Bond or Miss Elliott, they're licensed to teach math, and then they're teaching that, they're extending that lesson. So there's been a lot of really positive pieces from that. And then in 7th and 8th grade, a 7th and 8th grade teacher is trained differently. They're more of a content area specialist than necessarily more of a generalist like an elementary teacher. But when I walk around every day and I see, Mr. Bravich you may see a 7th grader watching Mr. Bravich's math lesson, but then during the math time or during the working time, Mr. Bravich is bouncing around and answering questions, and Mr. Ripley or Miss Randolph or Miss Heyer, Miss Olson, our exploratory Spanish teacher, they're answering questions, and then when they don't know the answer, like I may not know the answer to do algebra right now without a little refresher, Bruce comes over and he answers the question. One of the really unseen advantages that we have realized in this, and there are some things that we didn't realize, and there are some really that maybe that we're working through, but there's some real positive advantages. One of the main ones, the teachers know what is happening in each other's classrooms. So when we talk from a curriculum standpoint, they're already talking about natural connections for project-based learning activities coming down the line. So that's been a really powerful piece. So long story short, we're looking at different ways that we can continue to add to the already happening in-person instruction because it is happening, contrary to some of the misconceptions out there. And obviously it's different for each grade level, each content area, what that looks like. So we're looking at that. And then just balancing, quite frankly, the responsibilities of teachers. And it's a constant balancing act of how much do we push, because if we push too much, we're not taking care of our staff. And I think that's one of my jobs, is to make sure that I'm taking care of the well-being of my staff. Another thing that has come up, the bulk of our special ed services and student support services was being delivered in a push-in model, aside from a few different areas. But we've realized that that's very beneficial for some kids. It's not working for other kids. So we've added some additional pull-out times, and those are already starting. We found that Fridays have been amazing for our kids. So we've also added some time during that. And then that's that small group breakout sessions where teachers are pulling kids to service them. And then we did a survey of our students. Our students are our clients. So I wanted to hear firsthand what they thought. So we did a survey, and the vast majority of kids are very similar to what Melissa or Miss Barnett said. They are so excited to be in school. They're so excited to see people. They wish they could move more. That's one of the things of middle school that kids love. You know, every 47 minutes they get to take a break, they walk the hall, get a drink, do their thing, see their friends. It's that social piece. So that's a big piece that's missing, is the movement, but inside of that movement is social. And then they want to be with their friends. You know, some of the other stuff that we thought would be real big deals, it's really not to the kids. They've adjusted and they're doing a great job. And then during conferences, instead of doing our invite conferences where we invited just a couple, a handful of families from each grade level, each advisory teacher or case manager reached out to the families that they're working with and I sent a communication out, gave families the option of how would you like to be communicated with? Would you like a phone call? Would you like an email, or would you like a Zoom call, a Zoom face-to-face conference? So every middle school family had the opportunity to respond to that. Families that didn't respond to that email after attempts from their advisory teacher to get a hold of them, they got a phone call or an email just giving a heads up. This is where things are at. Please feel free to call. The bulk of the responses from families were very similar to what kids said. Not surprising, their kids echo what they're hearing. But the bulk of families said thank you. And I think that's important to take a little pause and just, our staff are doing an amazing job. And we can't forget the work that they're doing. And our families, the bulk of them, recognize that. It's easy to get stuck in the mud with a handful, but our staff are doing a fantastic job, and a huge thank you to our families for recognizing the work that people are doing. And then families had suggestions, and they were good suggestions and things that we're looking at, but every suggestion has a cost benefit with it. So we have to look at, can we rotate advisory classes so that teachers get to know kids that are outside of their advisory group? Some grade levels think that that's a really good idea, and some grade levels think that that will provide inconsistency for kids as we talk about distance learning. So there's a constant cost benefit that we're going through outside of just the COVID regulations that we're following. So that's a summary of the middle school. It's just constant adjusting. We're getting feedback through our faculty council. Just a recognition of our Jordan Ed Foundation. If you're able to see some flexible seating, some chairs for outside, Kelly Heyer was awarded a grant, and those chairs are, before we got snow in October, those chairs are being used inside the building and outside the building. So a thank you to the Ed Foundation and to Mrs. Heyer for that grant, and to our staff for the work they're doing.
Optional seat warmers that we can buy?
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't write that into the grant, so. Any questions about the middle school?
So like the kids that come in on Friday, did they come in at the request of the teachers?
Both, yep. So it has evolved over time. So at the start, it was just kids that were invited by the teachers. And then now it has opened up, so much so we've kind of swung to the other side where we have so many kids that are wanting to come in that we have to think about all of the regulations with COVID and who we can appropriately service on that day. So, if kids are coming in just to work and have a safe space to work, they're working in one area, and then in another area, teachers are teaching and working with groups. It was really neat on Friday. Each of the grade levels, 6th or 7th and 8th grade, the teachers had kids in their advisory areas, and they just adjusted and retaught that week's lesson to the kids. So, so kids were getting really intense direct instruction from the teachers. So, yeah.
And so your specials, band and choir and facts, how is all that shaping up?
It's band and choir is, we're not doing large group band. So Mr. TG just tweeted something out, and students are recording, individual songs. So they've been really creative on doing different projects that engage kids in different ways. Facts is I just met with Miss Rothmeyer today, Miss Altermat. She just got married, and she is starting the food truck unit. So, that's one of the things teachers are looking at, things that they've done historically. They can't sew, they can't do that project. So now she's shifted to more life skills piece that are still really important, but it's not the traditional facts class. They're not going to come home with a pillow this year, but they're going to come home with a lot of other things that they haven't in the past. So they are FIED. They have FIED once a day or once a week for 7th and 8th grade on site. Would I like to have it more? Absolutely. We'd love to, but those teachers are being creative with and being hands-on as much as they can.
Well, I can give a shout out to the middle school, not to give too much information because it's data about my kid, but they've all been very helpful. And I know one thing that Landon does struggle with is asking for help. So when you were talking about the teachers going around and asking questions, I don't imagine that he would be that kid that would do that. However, this past week he's ended up getting a lot of help, and so I was just wondering how we're identifying those kids that aren't as comfortable, because all week I was working with them, just email your teachers. If you're communicating with your teachers and letting them know they're going to give you grace, just like you're giving them grace, you just need to communicate. And that's the thing that he struggled with the most is, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'm like, I do it every day with my job, with my boss. It's just something you need to learn now. Yeah. And he wasn't doing it. But all the Jordan middle school teachers that he had were very helpful this week with him and getting him back on track and getting his panic mode and his mindset right.
So we have our grade level teams meet weekly, and then we have something called student support that meets on Friday. So any repetitive concerns come to our student support team, but really our grade level teams are the first line of defense, where they're talking about what are the needs that kids are having, who's struggling, and really it's the advisory teacher who is getting a sense of the kids that are needing additional support. That's a very common just middle school mentality in general. They don't want to be the one to raise their hand and ask the question, but it's the teachers constantly being aware of it, and I think you saw the result of that.
Yeah, and I was very appreciative, and believe me, he feels so much better now. So it was it was a win-win, and everybody pulled together and helped him this week, so I appreciate it, so thank you.
His new hairdo is really nice too, by the way.
He needs a haircut. It's not a battle. We keep saying you need a haircut, and he's like, no. So we're just waiting to see how long he's gonna let it get, because it's long.
I said, I like your hair, and he goes, my mom doesn't like it, so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Good evening. So, Ben and Melissa have covered a lot already. So I'll just kind of hit the highlights, and if you have questions, I can answer those for you. Many of the same comments, questions, a lot of our data from our students and from our staff is just through conversations. Students, I believe, are really enjoying the opportunity to be in school a couple days a week. And one of the things that we noticed with our juniors, our seniors, and our sophomores is, like our seniors, when we had our ACT day, they were out in the commons and they were so excited to see each other across their alphabets. It was just so fun to see them communicating across their groups, and just, they were so excited to see each other. And then we saw that again last week with our juniors and sophomores who had the pre-ACT and the ASVAB, that they just really enjoyed seeing their other half of the alphabet and seeing their friends that they hadn't seen in a school setting this year. So it was really affirming that there's still community among our students. It's just different than it has been before. So that would probably be that big piece of feedback. One of the other kind of some highlights or things that we've learned, Melissa mentioned this too, is that our students are really resilient. They really have not, their complaints aren't any different than they have been other years. You know, it's the same complaints about too much homework, not enough. It might, you know, depending on the student. But they're really resilient, and they've been able to just fight through anything that we've challenged them with. Probably the biggest challenge for them is also Google Classroom, and we're still continuing to work on that with students. But one of the positives, much like Ben was talking about, is our Friday Flex Days, where we bring in students for interventions, and we also are working on our extensions. So every Friday, we may have upwards of 150 students, and that's not individual students, that's a total of students. So some of those kids might be across multiple invites to get intervention help from their teachers. And then also students coming in for band, choir, CIS, all of our CIS classes, our AP classes, concurrent enrollment classes. So a lot of different opportunities for our students to be in school really 3 days a week in the areas where they need it. So that's been really positive, and something that I look at for the future of how can we incorporate that into our daily lives as we get back to quote unquote normal. So other than that, you know, this past week or 2 weeks ago, we had our invite conferences. And generally on invite conferences, we invite 12 kids from 9th grade, 12 kids from 10th grade, and 12 kids from 11th and 12th combined. So about 36 students. This time, because we did it through phone calls and Zoom meetings, we reached over 160 students, 160 different students. So again, learning from what we've done in the past and how we can make it better. So our next challenge will be conferences too, and how we do conferences, and stealing some ideas from both the elementary and middle school on how we can do that well for our large group conferences. So that's pretty much a summary of what we've got going on at the high school. Any questions for me? Can I do one last thing?
Yes.
We are going to try to have, we're not going to try, we're going to have homecoming this Friday, and we're trying to do some different things. I heard Ben talk about food trucks. We do have 3 food trucks coming in. We are, in case you get any feedback on it, we are doing only juniors and seniors. And the reason for that is we just can't, in our building and even out in the stadium, have more than those 2 classes of students. It's unfortunate, but it's the best we can do with what we're being given. So, and we're excited about it. And I think those students are excited about it, and I hope they come out and celebrate on Friday and have some fun during the day to do powder puff football, to do something new, which is kind of quote unquote powder puff volleyball. So it'll be the boys playing volleyball out at the stadium. We'll use the portable standards, et cetera. So that has nothing to do with this, so sorry.
No,
Renee,
it's great. It's great.
So thank you.
Yes, Jeff, the students are very excited about it.
Are they? Good.
Yes.
I can't always tell, so I don't know.
The feedback I'm getting is
Yeah.
Good.
very excited about Friday.
Well, good. Thank you.
And the weather's supposed to be pretty nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should be
too.
decent.
That's a good thing.
Well, and honestly, before I get to my next slide, I would just like to say shout out to our 3, building administrators, as well as the whole leadership team. It's amazing. I love to watch them problem solve and figure out how we can still provide, great opportunities for our kids with some of the interesting parameters that we've been navigating. And what Jeff referenced is just one more example of that. So I do appreciate that, as well as all of the things that have happened with Unity Day and all of the kindness activities that have been happening across our district. And I just know our kids really loved having those experiences. So that's just excellent. Chad will be talking to us briefly about the COVID-19 component and what that looks like with when there are possible or confirmed cases. So Chad.
Yeah. So yeah, well, the next slide that I am talking about is just what does it look like when there's possible or confirmed cases. So the biggest thing is communication with the building nurses. The one thing that we've learned through the beginning of the school year is just the
I'm having a hard
consistency
time
and
understanding what he's saying.
Chad, can you hold just one moment?
Yeah.
It's like there's an echo or something that's just kind of trailing that is just messing with my hearing.
Yes.
Is anybody else having that problem?
I am
It's not
too.
real clear.
Hey Chad, would you be upset if I took over this slide? Not that you're not amazing and capable, but with Mr. Damlow not with us this evening, I'm not sure I can fix the echo.
Okay, that's no problem.
I'm sorry. I'm sure you're heartbroken. All right, so I'm going to just run through this content is that all right?
Yeah.
All right, so Chad is absolutely right. Communication is really what triggers everything, and communication to our building nurses and then as well to our COVID coordinator. They have those individuals, communicate what the symptoms are, what the challenges are. There's a district survey report that helps to enter information into what's called a red cap report. Every district, that's a new vocabulary word across Minnesota, is the red cap report. And that's where information is completed by that district COVID coordinator. Chad is our compliance person. He's our district COVID coordinator. And that's a really important communication tool between our district and public health. That initiates a conversation with public health, and public health really drives all of the next steps. It drives the contact tracing, it drives what communications go where, and it drives, who's in isolation, who's quarantined, who do we sit tight on and just wait for information, and they direct all of those components. And I think it's important just as a community to recognize that it is a very challenging process. It's one that we take extremely seriously, and our principals are very helpful with that, especially in the classroom scenarios. But our overriding component with this is just privacy. And so we have to be very discreet and have to be very private with how all of that plays out. Information sharing, I think, there are staff members, there are families, understandably so, that, they're used to, if somebody has strep throat in the school, getting a letter saying, hey, there's strep somewhere. That isn't how this works with COVID-19, and so that's been a really interesting balance and challenge. But I will say overwhelmingly, our community and our families and our staff have, done very well with that and have been very understanding and supportive. One of the questions that's been popping up just in the last couple of days is, hey, we've heard that some districts have these amazing data dashboards where they say, in our district, we've had, like a ticker, this many cases or this many on quarantine. And the Department of Education in our commissioner calls has not recommended that districts do that for a variety of reasons, but some of our larger districts have. For a district like ours, that would not be a good move for us to do that, because if we had one COVID case and one staff member out, everybody knows who that is. And it really is a violation of privacy with that. And so,
Share more about why. Why would you have to, why by kind of sharing some of that data that you would have to automatically tie it back to who the individual is?
It wouldn't necessarily, but we're a small enough town that even though we do not communicate that, people know. And it's really challenging if we have had no cases in a particular building and suddenly we have our first case And the staff all knows who's gone or who has a sub. The families know Mrs. Evenson was gone today, they had a sub. And the state really doesn't recommend it. And so it's not a helpful tool. If you're in a system where you have 2,000 teachers, it's a little easier to put that out there. But as a district, we are not.
Isn't some of that being published by the state?
Is what?
Aren't there lists of schools and data? So I'm having a hard time as well. Not
Okay.
speaking for Rob, but with the HIPAA laws.
Sure.
Right.
So these are individual dashboards that buildings are developing
Right.
and putting them out there. What the state is doing is if you are a district that's had 5 or more cases within a 2-week window, they're naming your school. So that's where it's a little bit different. What these are is every case you have, it just starts a running total for the week.
Can you help me understand the difference between communicating that the school or your classroom has had strep versus COVID, because it's still data privacy and you're saying it in
Yeah.
a specific classroom, so you know in that classroom who's got it. So I guess are we foreseeing that there's going to be a change in how we communicate going forward on other illnesses as well because of COVID?
I wish I could communicate the why behind that. I can't, Lauren. But what I can say is that there have been times that the Department of Health has allowed us to share a broader letter to a classroom that says watch for signs and symptoms. But that hasn't been, they have not recommended that a school-wide letter or anything like that goes out.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I think what we want to do is you want to be able to use the information to be
Yeah.
able to make more informed decisions
Yeah.
and to be able to exude confidence when you have an environment where you should be able to mitigate some of that fear.
Yeah.
And so if we're able to have an effective process in place, we're able to share that we are safe and it is okay for children to come to the
Yeah.
district and to these buildings, and that we have data to support that. And then especially because I'm anticipating this is where we're going at some point in this conversation, is that when there are numbers at the county level that might be somewhat different than our specific community, and we want to be able to have a dialogue with the county or with the Department of Education to be able to have a conversation to discuss what's the most appropriate model for our district, that we want to be able to have some of that information at hand to be able to inform that discussion. And whether it's something that's put out publicly or something that we just are able to have, I think that I wouldn't want to shy away from some of that data, I guess is the bottom
Yeah.
line.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's good input. So let's talk about the data. So where is Scott County's most recent data? And so when you think about that 14-day case rate per 10,000, we have, as I updated this slide from an original, I was longing for the days that this number was 5 and 6. And that's really where we started. The numbers were that low. And so, you know, we, for about 5 weeks, or maybe a little bit longer than that, we're really in this tier, the 10 to less than 20 tier, where we could have had elementary with no restrictions and, you know, all of those components. We had decided when we adopted our base learning model, and I think that was a wise decision to move forward with the restrictions in elementary and make sure we had those higher standards for health and safety practices. And honestly, it served us very well as we have come to this point. We are currently in the both hybrid, model, but I will note that the data is ticking up. You can see that I have highlighted the next stage and what that could potentially mean, and we'll have more conversation about that. But we are monitoring some of those case rates. The last 2 weeks were the highest 2-week case rates that we'd had in Scott County so far. What I can say with confidence is that thankfully we're not seeing that play out in our schools. We have had cases in some of our schools, not all of our schools, and it really hasn't been a school transmission conversation. It has been community transmission, which I think we've been all aware of, as we've been monitoring this information. But Currently, we remain in the hybrid, and, we are monitoring should we need to shift to that next level.
So I guess my question's gonna be it's the recommended policy, what if you just don't? What if you say, we're not, yes, we get Scott County's really high,
Sure.
but like Rob's talking about, in Jordan, we haven't had a case in our school, or we have 2 cases in our school out of 2,000 kids.
Yep.
Like, it just doesn't, we get that Scott County's high, but whatever
Sure.
district's pushing us, or district's
Yep.
pushing us higher, what do you do in that case?
So it's coming up in our conversation about what that can look like, because we actually will find ourselves in that scenario. So if you're okay with me moving forward, we will talk about what that looks
Yeah.
like. First, I think we need to define what elementary and secondary is. And you'd think that'd be really, really easy. It's really not, because the statute has a little bit of a gray area in that. So for elementary, they define by statute elementary to be pre-K through grade 6 or any grade configuration thereof, essentially. They define secondary as grades 7 through 12. For mixed schools, it is a little uncertain. And so as recently as today, Erin and I spent time with our regional support coordinator and MDE in talking about what that looks like, because
What's a mixed school, Renee? Sorry.
Say that again?
What's a mixed school?
Middle school.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so middle school is mixed because it has some of the elementary and some of the secondary within it. And as we interpret it, and as we have defined our model, 5th and 6th grade has followed that in-person hybrid model, and our 7th and 8th grade has followed the ABABC model.
So as the statute states, this is very building specific.
Yes,
So-
it can be. So we could define secondary as 5 through 12, or we could define it as 7 through 12. And we choose to define that as 7 through 12 as it pertains to this.
Got it, okay, thank you.
You couldn't do elementary K through 8 though.
No. Great question. So with that, the things that we continue to monitor, obviously the data, that's a big factor. And then, Tom, you were talking about local considerations. That is another piece that we really look at. Have we had any cases within that building? Have we had any student cases within a building? How is that played out for us? Are we seeing, a couple of kids a week in a building? I mean, that looks different as well. And so those are some of those local considerations. The other piece of that conversation,
And sorry, Renee.
nope, don't be sorry.
When you say local considerations that the Department of Health or the county, that they're considering, or that we have an opportunity to help
Both.
inform what those are?
Both.
Okay,
And I am coming to that, I promise.
okay, got it.
No, it's
That's
okay.
the
Yep.
$64,000 question,
Yeah,
so.
I promise I'm getting there. I'm setting the table, Rob. So
Got
no. And so when you consider that, the local considerations are an important part of that conversation. And one of the things that Lisa Brodsky had shared with superintendents last Thursday when we met was, should our numbers get over 30, what does that look like? And the first step that they would do as public health would be look to see, why are the numbers there? Is it just broadly Scott County? What is happening within the local schools? Is there a breakout or an outbreak at a factory? Is there a long-term care facility that's had an outbreak? Or is it generally across? And so that's where they would take a look at that and help districts as they would make, any recommended changes to that model. And so local considerations will play out as well in a slide or two on the elementary conversation as well, which I will get to. There are other considerations, MDE, MDH, MSHSL guidelines that come into play with these conversations as well. So right now we're monitoring. We're looking at our 712. Obviously, as our data ticks up, we're monitoring whether or not we need to make a shift in our learning model. It is possible that we might need to, should those numbers skyrocket into the 30s, that could happen. There is an impact to that. There's an impact to athletics and arts as well as the academics that go with that, and we'll talk about that as well. For elementary and middle school, we of course are monitoring, and I'm going to talk to you briefly about a communication that I had with you last week on how we name our model in the learning portal as well. And so that's where some of that local consideration comes in as well, Tom. I'd like to start with secondary model though. And so when you think about the secondary model, there is a potential impact for grades 7 through 12 with distance learning. One of the things we have to do to be responsible in our system is prepare should we have to move into distance learning. So Jeff and staff and Ben and staff will be looking at what did we learn last year from distance learning, what worked really well, what didn't work very well. And we really need to have consideration for defined structures so that all stakeholders, moms, dads, grandparents, students, staff, they all know exactly what those expectations are within the structure. There are a couple of questions that we get routinely about what if we go to distance learning. One of them is if there is a required shift, and again, the state can require it. If we disagree, the commissioner gets the final word. That's true. How much time do we have? Do you have to switch the next day? Do you have a week? What does that look like? The executive order has defined 5 days for districts, but it's kind of one of those don't spend them all in one place because you could shift several times throughout a year potentially.
So that's 5 cumulative.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we would want to think about if we had to shift, what that looks like. Now, I was told last week when I asked for clarification that you can request more. You may get them, you may not, but you can request more. So that is, something to be aware of. But you don't have to make that shift the next day.
What's the timing of the discussion?
Mm-hmm.
What's that look like, or are there parameters on that?
Sure. So we started a little discussion last week, as I had shared. Chad and I meet with the area superintendents and public health every week, and we kind of track where the data is. And you see that play out in my weekly updates every week. I try to give you the data point and kind of the high points of the conversation. And, with that conversation, and as I communicated today as well, they kind of keep us aware of these things. As a district, we would want to make sure that we would have a conversation with our incident command team, that group that meets every Friday. I would reach out to the school board as well to let you know where we are at, and then we would want to map out, look at our calendar to see are there any natural breaks coming up that would be within that. The one thing I can say is that the data is published 2 weeks behind. They do that on purpose. With the Department of Ed, you've probably seen these sheets that list out all of the weeks of data per county. They're always 2 weeks behind, and they do that to make sure that they're accurate, to make sure that they've gone through, the last 2 weeks of data. And so, right now we have through 10/17 that will be published probably this week, and that's that number that's on the slide, that 29.15 likely will be that number. And so once that number is published, it kind of does make things a little more urgent for a district to make a decision on those components. And so there is not a specified, you have 48 hours. But I will say, if a district does make a change in their learning model, you have 24 hours to make the change on the learning model portal.
Renee, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Okay. Will that require school board involvement? Like, will we have to call a special meeting to approve that, or is that okay just to be done administratively?
You do not have to have a meeting for that. When you did the resolution back in August, that resolution allowed for establishing a base learning model and providing authority to the school district to make any shifts. That being said, the board would have full communication on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So another question that we would get is, how long would we be in that model? And we actually get that question. We did get that question. As people are wondering what would happen if we had to shift. And it's really unknown. Again, it's tracking that data. It's working through and looking at, what the trend is. The trend is an important component. If we were to have a blip into the 30s, but we hadn't been on trend to go up and then dip back down, again, that would that would say something as well. So the trend is an important part of that conversation.
So can I ask something?
Yes.
So they're 2 weeks behind, so by the time all the college kids come home at Thanksgiving, that will almost be to Christmas time. So then 2 weeks, we're already into almost the middle of January then.
Yep.
If we keep going up, if we made a switch the beginning of February, would we just stay there till the end of the school year then?
I don't think that we could say that because there are so many variables, Connie, with how that all plays out. And, you know, the other component is that, yes, the data is 2 weeks typically behind when it's published, but the data that we get, for example, if we get a preliminary number, we know it's not going to be lower than that. We know it's probably going to be higher than that as more cases and tests come in, because oftentimes they do go up because they just haven't got all the cases back. Those tests
so if
just
the
aren't
number,
counted.
if they've erred on the number, they probably erred too low.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, that says something as well.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Of course.
If we go up and we move to the next level where elementary is hybrid and secondary is distance, is the current elementary hybrid satisfactory?
Coming to that.
Okay, and I'm gonna just tell you where my mind's
Yeah.
going. If secondary goes to distance, the entire high school would be empty. Would we be able to move 7, 8 into the high school so they could still do a hybrid model?
Yeah.
I know you're going, but that was just kind of where my
Yeah.
mind was going,
Yeah.
that I don't know if that's a consideration, if that's something that can be asked of MDE,
Yeah.
or if we-
I've talked to MDE like 3 times today. It's definitely an interesting thought to move forward, but if we were to do distance learning, it would be 7 through 12.
Would we ask the question that 7th and 8th grade move to the high school since it's empty and have them be hybrid?
But you can't because they're secondary.
Yeah, they're
defined as
secondary. That,
So
and
it's-
we did ask many questions
How
of that, so.
How do
Dumb-
you change that definition?
statute?
Yeah. Damn it. Yeah.
Dumb question, but relevant, I guess, for this conversation.
Not a dumb
How long-
question.
What's the time frame for the executive order?
Oh, through the school year.
So it is through the school
Yeah.
year? Okay.
Yeah. I had to think on that one. I haven't had that question for a while.
Is this-
The executive order?
Is this part of an emergency executive order, or does the governor just have executive
Our
orders?
understanding is that the Safe Learning Plan is for the 2021 school year.
So
I
there's not,
think-
this is not gonna change for this school year?
Not that I'm aware of, but
Okay.
I mean, you know, there's new guidance all the time, so,
Okay.
yeah.
Because I think, not wanting to totally jump ahead, but it sounds like a lot of this is out of our control. We just need to be able to understand what the numbers are, if they're kind of within kind
Yeah.
of the margin of one of these change thresholds, maybe we can have a conversation, but if they're beyond a certain amount or a certain point, then we just have to be flexible and nimble to make necessary adjustments to be as least disruptive as possible.
Yes. There are many things that we will not have the opportunity to decide. When they talk about local control, it's about you can make decisions on how you can make your model fit within their parameters. And that's not changed. That
Right.
is how we landed at our base learning model. And that's, you know, the additional part of the conversation that we're getting to, navigating how that looks. Local control, but with their permission.
Right, makes sense.
The other piece of the secondary model considerations with grades 7 through 12, this is a reality that should we move into distance learning, they call it virtual practices. So athletics would shift as well, and the arts. The only time districts that are in distance learning can have activities is if you're a district, for example, I think like a St. Paul, I think they chose to be distance learning for the year, and you can choose to have activities as well. Unless your county data gets above that distance learning number 30, then you can't any longer.
So really 30 is that number.
Really, 30 is that number.
Okay, got it.
And so here's where that conversation, Tom, that you brought up on local control on that I was referring to, thinking about our model. I've been really proud of our hybrid model. I think that, you know, it really met the expectations of our community feedback, of our staff feedback. Our kids have done amazing. Our staff have done amazing. We've stayed healthy. Things have worked really, really well with that. About a week ago, I think it was a week ago, we received an update through the commissioner's email to all districts in Minnesota. And basically what it said was if you were one of those districts that received special permission to run every day in person with your students under a hybrid model because you've met all the mitigation strategies and done all of the things, you have to rename it. You can't call it hybrid anymore. We want you to call it in person. And so that set off a bunch of questions. I know Aaron and I have spoken to many individuals and had several conversations even today about what does that mean. So we got clarification that it means you have to rename it. So tomorrow Aaron will be going into the learning portal and saying that our K4 building is in person, which is really frustrating actually because we are doing all of the mitigation strategies. Our kids have all of the restrictions. It's not like we are doing like in person without restrictions. It couldn't be any further from the truth with that, but they are asking us to rename it. We will rename it.
So do we feel that we were correct and accurate at the start of the year when we defined the learning model the way we did?
Yes, actually that came right from the Department of Ed. Aaron worked with a specific person.
This is something I'm struggling with. Who is the Department of Ed? Right, because I keep hearing, I talked to the Department of Ed 3
Really
times
great
today.
question. Well, I don't want to name the people individually, but
Well,
but there are.
I kind of have an issue with it.
Yeah.
At some point, I mean, is it a summer intern? Is it somebody at a certain title? Is it a deputy director? I mean, that's what's,
Yeah.
Well, it's the
that's what's
commissioner.
frustrating.
I mean, there's a
Yeah.
commissioner. So
But
is that
I-
person changing
The
the
commissioner who has
definitions
not
like
been,
mid?
No,
has,
but
who has
Rob,
not been
I'm
voted.
I'm not hearing that Renee's talking to the commissioner.
Yeah.
Maybe you are. Maybe you're trying to protect that. But
No.
when you're
So,
talking to somebody 3 times a day.
It's both. So here's the thing. So the commissioner speaks directly along with the deputy commissioner and their entire department, has a direct conversation, providing information to the superintendents every week on Thursday. And that's where this came from. It just was all of a sudden, hey, districts, you have to do this now.
So is this followed up by written guidance? I mean,
Yep, I
guess-
emailed a copy of that to the board, actually right out of the written guidance.
Okay.
And as Aaron and I reviewed the previous guidance with this guidance, it is a shift, and that does happen quite frequently. As the Department of Ed is supporting this process, there are updates and shifts, and I think that's the best way I can describe this.
Right. Well, and I guess I see this as a potential opportunity though. So what's essentially, if I'm understanding this correctly, there was a procedure or guidance that was written at the beginning of the year.
Yep,
There was a modification made.
yep,
Unfortunately, we don't necessarily like this kind of new kind of change, but it is showing precedence that there is change within the guidance that can at least be considered.
yeah,
I
that's
guess one of
true.
the questions that I have is particularly as we are taking a look at these 3 models and making sure that we're trying to figure out the best for our community and for our district, what kind of lobbying opportunities do we have to try to make and adapt to some of the requirements that are in place right now to fit the guidance with actually what's going on the ground, and what's the process to have those conversations,
Sure.
I guess.
So what the process looks like is we communicate with our regional support and with the Department of Ed. So that's what Aaron and I do, and that's what we've done. So today we met with Heather, I can't remember her last name, and we met with Bianca Viernig. and had a conversation because, again, we have expressed our concern that this is a shift in the guidance that we were not anticipating, along with many other districts. And these conversations, I've probably talked to, Bianca 5 times in the last week in relation to what does this actually mean? What are you saying? Are you now saying as a district we need to change our model? Because I'm not reading that, but we want to make sure, what are you really saying? So before the board meeting tonight, I did receive confirmation that our model is intact and our model can move forward as an elementary school, which it should, because it's working well. But that we will need to have a conversation about what is the threshold that we might consider shifting. Are there any health and safety components that we might need to consider? If the data looks a certain way, if we start having a case or any cases at that site, would you consider shifting? So those will be our ongoing conversations. But a broader answer, what is our recourse? If we disagree, our recourse is calling the commissioner and saying we disagree and having that conversation.
So with the renaming of the model as in person, and if our numbers jump above, does that then mean we're more of a traditional distance at the elementary school, or is the in-person that we're doing satisfactory?
For right now, the in-person that we are doing is satisfactory. We have local control over that decision. What they have said is that we should consider what threshold we might want to consider changing to a traditional hybrid and defining what hybrid looks like. And that is, part of the reason I brought forward again the slides that, we looked at earlier this summer, I think it was in August, and then brought forward an additional model that we would consider should we have to shift in any way. Right now, our elementary model does not need to shift. We'll keep our tight health and safety standards. We'll keep our kiddos there 5 days a week. But down the road, should our data look different, we may need to consider a new hybrid model. And so that's the purpose for having that. Yeah.
If they're gonna rename us all in person, can we relax some of the things that we have going on in there?
We could, but I wouldn't, because it's working. Our kids are doing well, they're healthy, and I really believe that that's a contributing factor. I don't know that it would be helpful to start having them eat in the cafeteria. I really don't want to risk what's been working with our health and safety standards.
Plus, if we continue with what we're doing and the numbers jump, maybe they'll let us, rather than go to a traditional hybrid, see that everything that we're doing is working and maybe consider us
Correct.
to stay with our in-person model.
Correct.
I guess is kind of what I'm hoping for, because I don't think hybrid will be beneficial for our elementary kids.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm confused though. So when you say that we have choice, like we can shoot, like, I mean, right now it sounds like the state is using this case per 10,000 as kind of the decision-making kind of factor. So they're giving us the ability of, this is what we think the threshold is before we go from in-person to hybrid.
Yeah,
And
the
then
email.
If so, what is kind of the range that we have?
So
that's
their
kind of within
first
our purview?
choice, their first choice is that once we would have hit 20,
Okay.
that our students wouldn't be in person 5 days a week. That's their first choice.
Okay.
The clarification I sought is because, again, we were given guidance along with many other districts that we could run the model we're doing because we met 50% capacity on transportation,
Right, yep.
50%, all of those things, 6 feet social distance, smaller groups of kids, all of that. Because they've changed the naming protocols on that and moving forward with that, they have told me, and I have it in writing, that just because our numbers in the 14-day threshold have tipped into that higher bracket, we do not have to change it this time, but they strongly suggest we consider what threshold we might make a change to hybrid.
Did they tell you what the
that's so
considering
odd.
did they tell you what the considering factors were for renaming
No.
our model?
No, I did hear anecdotally that there were some challenges with, outstate districts. Many are in the model that that we are in, their space. They're able to run smaller class sizes, they're able to do all of the things. And there were some challenges and challenging conversations, and that was happening about 2 weeks ago, and then suddenly this came forward.
Right.
That's
Well,
all I know.
I guess, so here's the question I guess that I have. So through the data, we know definitively that the vast majority of the days in September, we were above 20 per 10,000 case. We operated in person for elementary school, regardless of what designation that you want, very successfully. We did not have a single positive COVID case there.
True.
So we showed that we were able to create kind of that environment in the midst of what was going on within the county. Not knowing this 100%, but there is a high probability that the cases in October are probably going to be a little bit higher than in September. We're still maintaining kind of the same kind of threshold. They're giving us, it sounds like, latitude in terms of what we think a threshold is for hybrids. Why wouldn't we be able to just come back in and say we want it to be in person until we get to 50 cases per 10,000? I mean, that's the part where it seems like there has to be some kind of parameter that's in place for them to not be definitive.
And my question beyond that is, did we get called in September? Like, did somebody call and say,
No.
hey, right? So I'm
No.
also struggling with like if we
I know.
like if we don't pick up the phone, like, you know.
Yeah, we didn't get called. None of the districts did.
No, this is better though, because usually you don't get local control on these things.
Right.
Usually they just dictate it to you. So I think with the shift, I would be interested, instead of saying 50 per 10,000 or 60 per 10,000, what we should set as a limit of when we have students that are getting infected.
Sure.
Because again, we could have, I don't want to name any businesses, XYZ business, right, with 500 employees could all come down with it and boost our numbers up in the county like crazy.
Yep.
We may not have any in the elementary school.
Well-
So maybe we should shift ours. They say, well, what's your threshold? We don't have a threshold of 10 per 10,000. We have a student threshold. And if we have an infection rate above 2% or 3% of our students, then we need to shift to a distance model in that building or that, you
And
know,
I don't
something
disagree
like that.
at all. And the other piece of that as well is not just students, it's staff. So you have to be able to staff your buildings
sure.
to run these models, and so that's a factor too. There's a district, not too far from us that just had to shift their model because of staff considerations.
In one building. Yeah.
And so there are a lot of things. And I feel bad. I wish I could give you the why. I wish I could explain some of this. You're asking really good questions. I can't tell you the why. What I can tell you though is that we ask questions and we keep asking questions to get clarity. I can't tell you the number of conversations just to even get this clarity that we have. And so I wish I could tell you more about the Department of Education. I can't.
Yeah. I mean, and please, for my points of kind of clarification or questions, it's just more of wanting to kind of know, but then also too, I know that particularly if we have to make a change, these questions are going to come.
You bet.
At the district, and so really, really appreciate you reaching out and
Absolutely.
trying to get these answers from the Department of Education. Where is the like MSBA and other kind of resources that we have kind of at our disposal to kind of be helping with some of these things? Are we kind of appropriately leveraging those resources? Are they helping us out in terms of some of this clarification or lobbying?
Yes, I had a Region 2 meeting on Thursday last week down in Mankato. It was actually in person, which was really nice. And all of the same conversations and advocating for clarity, that has really been the biggest challenge, that there hasn't necessarily been a lot of clarity or a lot of the why with some things. And I mean, we saw that play out a little bit with some of the MSHSL guidelines that were maybe misaligned compared to some of the Department of Ed or Department of Health guidelines. And so all we can do is continue to advocate and ask those questions because it's been a big challenge. It's been a big challenge. And it's not unique to our district. All of the districts are having these conversations right now because it has felt a little bit misaligned in some ways.
It just, I can't believe I'm saying this either, but it just really feels like even going back to Matt's, dealings last spring, it feels like you get punished for being proactive or asking a question,
I know.
right?
I know.
It comes back as punitive, and that's why I just keep getting back to who do we really have to listen to? I mean, if you hear something on an MSBA call with so-and-so, is that now guidance? Is that not guidance? It kind of sounds like it's ultimately guidance if it comes via a memo from the Commissioner of
Yeah.
Education,
Exactly.
which begs the question to me, I mean, do we take the position that we have complete local control until you get the guidance from the Commissioner?
And
Because,
the
I mean,
the
there's certain.
danger with that is, we've been told that they can withhold funding.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
fine
but
us.
so- a mid-level staffer at the Department of Education cannot withhold funding. That
Right.
would have to come through the Commissioner.
An official letter of
Right,
some
and
sort.
Yeah.
that's
with
my
the
frustration here,
ultimatum.
and
I know.
to echo what Rob said, it's not directed at any of you.
Yeah.
Who are phenomenal, but it's at
Yeah.
a feeling, sitting here with a feeling of absolutely no control or influence over very important decisions. And when I say no influence, I mean, yeah, there's an appeals process. Well, what's the process? How does that work? Within how many hours are you supposed to get a decision? Can we continue doing what we're doing until we get a definitive decision from the Commissioner?
I will tell you, it is not that clean. I wish it was, it's just not. And the amount of time it took even to get an answer on how we're defining secondary and elementary was very interesting. The amount of questions and time it's taken to find out, do we have to rename our, model or not, has been incredibly time consuming just to get to that point. And so, the purpose tonight, for me truly, was to make you aware and to really talk through that our data isn't improving, it's not rebounding. It's quite possible we'll have to do a different model in secondary. It's been frustrating that we have to rename our elementary model, but it looks like we're going to be able to continue our elementary model. But if we can't in the future, I wanted to make sure that we brought forward those slides again to show you some of the options we would have. I think there's one front runner if our hand is forced and we have to change elementary. I think there's one that makes the most sense and is the least obtrusive to our students and families, or impactful, and really to just share with you next steps, because it's complicated. And I promise this team behind me and Chad and myself, we're advocating every day so that we can get clarity and as we receive new guidance coming at us through almost every email.
So if the number a week from Thursday is 30.5, what's the first thing you're gonna do?
So the first thing we would do is get in touch with Lisa Brodsky and find out, what does that number mean? Is there a factory with an outbreak? Is there, some kind of an outbreak that impacts that number so that we can disregard? Because a good example is Mankato. Mankato Public Schools, their number went through the roof probably a month ago. They did not change their model because it was an outbreak at the university. And so they're able to kind of dig in and look at that and then make, a guidance to our county school district superintendents to say, we really think you all need to move. Or they could say, we think you should move, but you probably look good because you haven't had a case in your community in 3 weeks. They can look at those things. They have all of that information. And once we would have that, I would pull our incident response team together and have that conversation about what does that mean for us. We've already started planning possible scenarios because responsibly we need to be ahead of that game, and we've been talking about it for a long time. And then I would communicate with you as a board and let you know what that number is at and what our area schools are going to be doing.
And with the free testing going on today in New Prague, tomorrow at Valley Green, our numbers will go up.
Are people just going in to arbitrarily test, or are they going in with symptoms to test?
No, you
Nope,
can just
anybody.
go, anybody can.
I thought you had to have symptoms
Nope.
to be tested.
No symptoms.
What can we, as a board or as a community, do to help advocate, because right now, it's just you and the administrative teams and other district teams that are doing all that advocating, but really, what can community members and board members do to help you?
Communicate with the commissioner's office, communicate with the governor's office, ask your questions, share your thoughts, because they're the ones defining policy, and that's really where it comes down.
Deb, this might be a good question for you, but for MSBA, do they have a subcommittee structure that they have tried to create a more of a kind of an advocacy group for some of these outer districts?
MASSA,
Where-
MSBA, AMSD, they are all working diligently on this.
Have they
Kirk is in-
made any inroads? Have they been successful in any of this stuff yet, to your
With the
estimation?
department, I'll be real blunt with you. No.
Okay.
I think we need to contact state senators and representatives.
Renee, I would just,
Yeah.
as you're talking to them, I would continue to use the infection rate of our student, or
Yeah.
our buildings itself.
Absolutely.
Because I think that really is the most important thing, and that's your greatest argument. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what the community is, it matters what's happening in these buildings. And
I
of course,
agree.
with teachers, is something outside of the control. Of course, if you
Right.
get a bunch of teachers, it is what it is. If you get 1 or
Yeah.
2% of the teachers, you're in trouble.
Yes.
But if it's all students, you know, it just might not meet anything.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree, and that was the conversation we had today. It seemed absolutely crazy that we were even considering any kind of a shift when we've not had that need. And our teachers, again, I've said this probably 10 times tonight, they're doing an incredible job. Our families are as well, our kids are healthy, and that's been our goal all along. So I feel really great about our structures that we've put in place, and we should be proud of how well they have gone. So,
I guess the other- I
lack
mean-
of local control to me is really on point. To your point, Lauren, to me, it makes zero sense that we could accommodate, if we could accommodate 7th and 8th graders.
It's worse than
Like-
lack of local control though, because it's stating that there's local control,
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
And then- and
it
then-
makes zero sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess based on everything that we've said, or that it sounds like has kind of been kind of communicated to us, I mean, in my mind, and I'm sure you guys are already doing this, but the idea of just doubling down on getting prepared for
yeah.
some of these models that very well could be an eventuality is
Yeah.
going to be really, really important to just be able to manage that transition with as minimal kind of disruption as possible.
Yeah.
And then making sure that we have an absolute crystal clear communication I mean, this is just
Yeah.
some of the complexity that we've, you know, kind of just gone through just in tonight's conversation. This is going to go over the heads of a lot of families kind of in the
Yeah.
district, rightfully so. I mean, part of it's going over my head right now too. But to be able to get out kind of those kind of key points, just so that, you know, we're kind of managing kind of the
Yeah.
expectations of those that are in the community is going to be really, really important as well.
Yeah, it's a really great point. I think too, I mean, it had been a little bit since we reminded our families of what the learning model parameters look like. You know, where we fell with that with our base learning model. Kat today put out an exceptional communication to families, just as a reminder of what that looks like and how decisions are made. Because I think that's important, just so that as we're watching the data, should we have a need to make a shift, that we've front-loaded some of that, you know, conversation. And again, at this point, nothing is shifting. I think that I can't be more clear about that. Nothing has shifted. But there is the potential for our 7 through 12 that may shift. And for right now, because things are going so well with elementary, we'll have to rename it, but nothing has shifted. I will note, I did include some slides, and we won't go into detail with these. I do want to point out one of the slides, the others you've seen. Should we need to do something different in our K-4? If we get to a point and they do start putting some different parameters, or if we start seeing students that, you know, have positive case rate or things like that, if we were to have that happen and we have to do something different with hybrid, one of the scenarios we are looking back for our K-4 building, you'll see represented in the top, would be to prioritize our youngest grade levels and add a day of distance learning for our oldest grade level in that building. And then aligning with our 5-6, having that day of distance learning as well. So that is a consideration potentially. There are positives and negatives with anything. Honestly, we don't want our kids not to be at school. We want them in school every day. But if we have to have a distance learning component added, to me, this would be the least intrusive that we could offer to our families. And so that would probably be our front runner if we had to do that. Because we had included other options to the board in August, I didn't feel right not including those in this as well. These are ones that you've seen before. I've just added 5-6. This is another model with K2 every day, and then having that ABC for other grade levels as well. You've seen this before. And then also another option just with everybody on the ABC, which would be my least favorite of all ever. But just wanted to make sure we were transparent that we'd brought those forward before. I didn't feel right not including them.
Yeah, I think the importance of having as many of the young kids, so K3, that's what it is,
Yeah.
in school is so important. This is gonna hit families in a way that it didn't in the spring.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, there are more people working.
Right.
Yep.
Fewer people, or less benefits for people who are not working.
Yep.
Right? And this can be a devastating change to families in this community, having the potential of having elementary school age kids
Yep.
out of school.
Well, and again, very difficult. I think, Rob, you mentioned crystal clear communication. It will be essential to say the why. I mean, we literally will have to have some good rationale and reason, for a shift like that, because our model is working really, really well. And I can't say that enough. Our kids have been healthy. It's worked really, really well. So just being articulate, should there have to be any kind of a shift, I think will be really important for our community. And that leads us to the next steps. Again, we'll continue to monitor and consult with public health. Staff and community communication is really important. We're going to be surveying our families again to inform, what's going well right now, what are some things you want us to know and think about. So we'll be drafting a community survey as well as a staff survey again, because I think it's important to request that feedback. We do continue to really value that multiple format communication. It's been really helpful to be able to continue to share information with our families. We will have, the update went out today with, data and how we monitor and what that looks like. That happened today already. We'll be doing a communication to families in November as well for the registration for JVA for our next semester. Deb, I think you asked a question about that and how that all works. And so we'll be doing that ahead of some of the registration components so that we can make sure we've got good balanced classes and if there are any impacts, because we could have students coming back to our schools, and then that might shift some of those class lists. We could have students shifting out as well. So that'll be happening in November, and I think that'll wrap up probably around the 10th of December or maybe a little bit earlier for that. And then again, stakeholder feedback's really important. Some of our families have been just really helpful and forthcoming with sharing that with the teachers and as well as our staff. Our staff have been really good in attending weekly meetings and providing input and feedback to help inform the model. So that's been really helpful. So if there are any other questions, yes, Ryan.
My question is, and you probably I don't know that you have an answer to it, but on the other side or way back down, right? Like, how quickly are you able to act? So we're above 30 for 4 weeks. We go back below. I mean, one, how quickly can we change? And two, is that a local control? Or do we have to call for a letter from the Department of Education to confirm that, yes, in fact, it is below 30?
And so my understanding of that would be, and I kind of alluded to it on an earlier slide, but probably got distracted. Again, trend data is important. So, it would be important likely for Scott County Public Health to make that recommendation to go less restrictive. If we had one blip down and another blip back up, that says something, but if you have a couple of weeks trending and you see that, you know, playing out, I think it's a lot easier to shift back. The other important piece of that is shifting back requires some planning time, so we want to make sure that we gave that time to our staff to prepare for that, which, you know, would be a few days as well. You know, when you think of those 5 cumulative days throughout the year, we'd want to make sure that we had some available for that too. But it wouldn't be a 24-hour thing. It would
Yeah,
be.
I'm not suggesting that it would be.
Yeah, no, I just, somebody in the public
And-
might want to
and
know that.
honestly, like, my thought process is going the other way, which is like, once we do this once,
Mhm.
I'm just not sure that I have the conviction to keep moving back and forth.
Mm.
I feel like each time you do that, it's gonna be a challenge with staff, it's gonna be a challenge with parents, and it's just gonna be exhausting. So,
Some districts have communicated actual, you know, they will evaluate it. I saw one district communicated they're shifting to distance learning on a, I don't know, let's say November 6th, 7th. They'll make that shift, and they have communicated to their public that that shift will be in place, and they'll revisit at the end of their semester. And then look to see what the data is doing at that time, because they too agreed that they felt like families needed to kind of have an idea. So they would start looking at that trend data before, you know, the end of the
I mean,
semester.
getting back to that daycare question, I'm not sure if it's worse to,
Mhm.
like, minimize the amount of days you're out of school,
Yeah.
or to be in a constant flux of what your childcare arrangement is. We may be better serving people by saying that when we make this decision to switch, we're just gonna do it for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or
Mhm.
a quarter, whatever. it
Well, the
is.
problem with that is the financial implications on the family though, too.
Sure.
You know, because of course, then you're paying daycare expenses, so they, you know, those that are needing that want you back in school as quick
And we
as you
have a
can.
shortage
Right,
of
but-
daycare.
And you got a shortage.
And
of
I totally
daycare.
get all
Yeah,
that,
you
but a
know.
lot of times it can be more expensive if you don't, if you don't have direction.
Right.
And you don't know what you're doing for the, you know, daycares are not gonna just take
Right.
kids and
Oh, for
enroll
sure.
them,
Yep.
you know, on a whim. Some
Yeah.
do, right? Like,
Yeah.
Playworks might be packed, I don't know what
Right.
their policy
They're
is,
not
but
even
that's,
open to the public.
you know, drop-in can frequently be
Yeah.
very expensive too.
Oh, with that though, will they have that first responder thing where we have to
Yeah.
have daycare open
Essential
free
worker.
for
Yeah.
for the
They're
essential
still gonna
worker
have
as it
that anyways.
is?
Yep, there's
Well, but
impact
that's-
to kids company and all
That's
of that
not for
planning.
us.
but-
That definition of essential worker is different than the definition of essential workers we had in the spring, right? So if you're
Right.
working in a factory as an essential worker, you don't get that benefit. That was for healthcare workers. and
Right, but we'll
nurses.
still have that for healthcare
Sure.
workers and first
Sure.
responders,
Yes.
so those kids that were previously in school will now be in Kids Co. free to the
Those
parent.
kids, of those kids that work in those occupations.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those,
Yeah.
yeah, but the other, obviously the
Yeah.
others.
Yeah, the tier one childcare, and that's an impact to the district as well. We would need to look at space that we would have and make that work as well. So Stephen and department will be doing that.
So this might be a Joe question, but for some of the activities that we have, now knowing that kind of the conference that we're in,
Mhm.
what are there, what, 3 or 4 different counties of kind of participating schools, or however many it is? If a subset of those schools go over 30, we stay under 30, participation in extracurricular activities, does that impact us if some of those schools are affected and then therefore they can't participate?
Yes.
Okay, so then
That's
that,
us rebuilding schedules and reaching out to teams for competition.
so that, okay, so there's a little bit of that going on too.
Yeah, and it already has.
A lot of that.
So I may have
Yeah.
missed it
Yeah.
on the slide earlier too, but if we go into a 7-12 distance model,
Mm-hmm.
I mean. so-
No
sports.
extracurricular.
That's
We
it.
call it virtual practice, but
That's it.
that
That's
means
it.
like fortnight together, right?
That is
Yeah.
right.
exactly it. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Which is that, I mean, and that's another thing that's so challenging with this, even in the hybrid model right now, just, I mean, and we heard it just from the report, from the principals of just the connectiveness of
Mhm.
the students and finding ways for them to be able to do that, whether it's in the classroom setting, whether it's extracurricular activities, whether it's kind of other type of sponsored events, but that's definitely gonna be something that we're gonna wanna continue to be very
Yeah.
cognizant of, just in terms of the mental health aspect as we go throughout the year.
So I think I have like 3 additional questions that I don't expect you to answer, but I just wanted
Okay.
to ask them. One is, so it's pretty clear what happens with high school sports. We probably need to think through, if we haven't already, at what level we continue to allow non-school sponsored activities, organizations to use the facility, and whether that
Yeah.
changes.
Yep.
Is there anything in the guidance related to community ed? So like, is that triggered by this same table?
It's a different table, but there is separate guidance. For example, we're still running at 25% capacity within our CERT.
Well, then the CERT
And-
was gonna be a separate question for me.
Yeah,
if
yeah, but in terms of, how we allow people to utilize our facilities, and different activities, that is all part of a separate, guidance that Stephen and his team work through.
That might be really helpful for another communication to go out, just as a refresher.
Yeah, Joint Powers meets this week, so we'll be talking about
I'm
it.
even thinking through more so the guidance, like just philosophy and philosophically for me. If the powers that be are deeming that it's not safe for kids to be in this building, that seems like that should be a consistent policy regardless of the guidelines. Is more what I'm thinking about.
Nope, I get it. It's actually a conversation that we've had, and it's challenging with a building like the CERC, for example, because that's more than just a school district building. It's a city, business as well, where people that don't have kids in school might have memberships and won't understand why it's not open if, and so that's a different conversation. But it is one we've had. And I think at a certain point last year, it might have been shut down during distance learning. But at that point as well, I don't think anybody had any idea what was happening in the state. It was different. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I think the closure of the CERC was more about the stay-at-home order.
That was
the Yeah.
stay-at-home order.
Closing.
Yeah.
But beyond the CERC, I mean, there's a significant amount of stuff that happens in the other 3 buildings.
Yeah.
And I'm not advocating for not doing it, believe me, but I'm just, just trying to think through
Sure.
consistency of approach.
Any other questions this evening?
I guess I don't really have a question, but I have a comment. And it's probably not going to be well liked, so I'm just going to preface with that. I think that the Department of Ed and the Department of Health, and I understand there is a lot of frustration on everybody's part, but I think what they are trying to do is trying to have everything based on data. Those numbers weren't pulled out of a hat. They were taken from other countries and what their experience has been. They have been taken from all sorts of angles to try to make sure that our kids and our staff stay safe. And so I guess I just want to make sure that people understand that, like, going and doing more testing, people are asymptomatic. And so if they don't know that they have COVID, they can spread it. And I do not want that to happen to any of our staff. I have a friend in the hospital right now with COVID. And so I'm hoping she pulls through. So I guess, and I just really want to emphasize that this is about keeping kids and staff safe. I understand mental health. I understand all of those issues, but I do think that we also need to keep in mind, and I know you are, but it just feels to me like I understand there's frustrations, but again, this is not based on like just pulling something out of a hat. There is actual data that shows that if there is a certain number of people in your community who have COVID, who have tested positive, that it will spread. And once we get above a certain threshold, that is what will happen. And so I guess I want us to remain understanding of that. So that's just my comment.
Thank you, Sandy. I appreciate that.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. On to our special meeting. I'll call the meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please. Here.
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 Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Okay, consideration of agenda, it's a special meeting, we can't change the agenda. We have 5 consent agenda items, the resignation of elementary school paraprofessional Jacob Allen, resignation of the 8th grade boys basketball coach Kevin Way, resignation of the middle school wrestling coach Zachary Zimmer, FMLA request for Ariane Jensen, and the local 284 contract that was negotiated and it was voted on by 284, I believe, this past week. So those are the consent agenda items. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Tom, is there a second?
Second.
Second, Rob, discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, or roll call, please? Yes.
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 Motion carries. Consent agenda, I need a motion to approve the consent items.
This is Sandy, so moved.
Sandy moves, is there a second?
Second.
Second, Connie, discussion? Roll call, please? Yes.
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 Motion carries. Tom?
Move to adjourn?
We have a
Second.
motion. Second, Lauren, roll call, please.
Don't we have the local 284 contract?
That was under consent.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
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 Motion carries, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent.
Thank you.